We're going to get started with the stakeholder panel. For those of you I haven't met, my name is Kristin Feeney. I'm a senior data scientist with Deloitte. Yes, Deloitte does real-world evidence. We can talk about that later. I have the wonderful privilege of being the moderator to our esteemed panelists today. I'm going to go through their intros, tell you a little bit about these wonderful gentlemen and the roles that they occupy in our community. Then we're going to kick off the discussion. This is a stakeholder panel, so we're going to engage you guys with questions and allow you to ask. I don't have a fancy app like John. Thanks, John. You raised the bar so high. But we will have the mics open, and we really want this to be a discussion with the broader community. So we look forward to that. Our first panelist right here, many of you may recognize, Karthik Natarajan. He is an assistant professor in the Department of Biomedical Informatics at Columbia University. He received his bachelor's in computer science at the University of Texas at Austin. After working in the technology sector, he went on to obtain his PhD in biomedical informatics at Columbia. His research interests are operationalizing clinical informatics solutions. His specific area of interest is in applying scalable information retrieval and text processing methods on clinical data in order to build applications that support both health professionals and researchers. And if you don't know, he's a very active participant on the forum and was just saying how, gosh, the forum is so quiet right now because we're all at the symposium. He is currently working on converting United Network of Organ Sharing data to enabling transplant outcomes analysis. He is also actively working on using OMOP to integrate EHR data for various sites in the All of Us research program. And as part of that coordinating center at Columbia, he helps with educating new members on ETL, so props for education. We saw that was a very big thing today. And he's working through those processes on the CDM. He also oversees many local instances of OMOP CDMs at Columbia and New York Presbyterian. Welcome, Karthik. Sitting next to him is Gowtham Rao. Gowtham is the Chief Medical Informatics Officer at Blue Cross Blue Shield of South Carolina, where he's responsible for the portfolio of informatics and data science in the Population Health Division. Dr. Rao was introduced to the Odyssey community in 2016 and has since joined the journey by improving health outcomes through evidence generation. Some of Dr. Rao's major contributions include major revisions to the OMOP CDM to support payer needs. You can thank him for the visit detail, the cost, the payer plan period, that's a tongue twister, and a number of bespoke applications of the cohort builders use cases. So thank you, Gowtham, for fighting the charge for the payer scene. We very much appreciate his contributions. He is a board-certified physician, certified in preventative medicine and clinical informatics, and he earned a PhD in epidemiology and biostatistics. Welcome, Gowtham. Next to Gowtham is Ming Jack Po. Jack Po is a product manager at Google working on medical brain and health cloud. He works on applying and scaling up machine learning, in particular, deep neural networks for healthcare applications. Prior to his current role at Google, he has also spent time in Google's search unit working on health-related queries. In particular, he worked on projects that helped bring consumers better curated information on various health conditions, medications, birth control, and mental health. Before joining Google, Jack spent a decade working in different consulting capacities in areas related to medical devices and healthcare delivery. He has also served in a variety of advisory capacities to foreign governments and the White House on how to scale up healthcare systems. He received a bachelor's degree in biomedical engineering and a master's degree in mathematics from Johns Hopkins. He holds an MD and a PhD from Columbia University. Welcome, Jack. And last but not least, we have an esteemed newer member of our community, Dr. Nasser Al-Qahtani. Dr. Al-Qahtani works as an advisor to the Vice President of Drug Affairs for the Saudi Food and Drug Authority, the SFDA. As a scientific advisor, he oversees all pharmacovigilance, drug safety, and pharmacoepidemiology services, including research, mentorship, hands-on training, and offering consultations. He has a Bachelor's of Science in Pharmacy from Saudi Arabia, a Master's in Science in Clinical Pharmacy from the UK, and a PhD in Health Policy and Outcomes Research, specializing in pharmacoepidemiology from the US. He has been a member of the establishment team of the pharmacovigilance system in Saudi Arabia, and he is on a variety of professional societies, including the ISPE, the ISOP, and the ISPOR. He is an associate reviewer for the Pharmacoepidemiology and Drug Safety Journal. So perhaps if you have publication interest, he might be a friend to make. And he is a chairperson of the Scientific Committee for the SFDA Research Center and a senior research associate for the Medication Safety Research Chair at the highly ranked University of Saudi Arabia, KSCO. So welcome to all of our esteemed panelists. We are very, very grateful for their contributions to the community. And today they represent a variety of perspectives that we want you to engage and hear more from. The first question that we wanted to ask them is, why Odyssey? There are plenty of initiatives you could be part of and you could bring your talents to. Why Odyssey?
So, I mean, I guess this is a question from the reaction panel previously.
Yeah, John stole my
right?
question.
So, besides it being part of my work, but I think for me, it was it 2 years ago was my first symposium, and I definitely drank the Kool-Aid. I was a bit of a skeptic, but it was phenomenal how we could do kind of large-scale studies, multi-site studies so quickly, and the fact that it was an active community that was listening and changing their decisions on how they approach the data model. I mean, like Gowtham has mentioned about the visit details table. As a stakeholder from the EHR, that's essential, and it happened. So I think for me, it's how collaborative and kind of organic the Odyssey community is.
I've been working for my company, which is a payer organization, for about 5 years now. And during that 5 years, we have worked on multiple challenges. And each challenge brought to it a certain experience. Last year, 2016, I came to the Odyssey Symposium. My wife, who's a professor at the medical university, was attending it, and I came with her. And as I was listening to the presentation, Patrick Ryan, John Duke, and everybody else, I was like, wait a minute, this is kind of fits in with what we've been doing for the last 5 years. So there was an aha moment. And going back, I felt, wait, there is this opportunity to work for a payer industry, to work with the Odyssey. It's not apparent. It's a hidden opportunity. And at the same time, I felt, wait, this is a huge opportunity, because if you think about why it's hidden, it's because most people don't understand what payers do. And when you talk to anybody, the branding of the Odyssey is around drug safety. So when I went back and I said, I am impressed by Odyssey, I want to sponsor a project in our organization to deploy the Odyssey tools, the OMAP Common Data Model, the leaders of our organization said, okay, let's see what this is. And then when they checked and did the Google search, they said, this is medication safety. How does it fit in? But for me as an epidemiologist, it was kind of obvious. That was one. And then the second one was, I felt like this is a huge opportunity, because if you think about it, the healthcare industry, at least in this country, is a $2 trillion industry. And the payers have something to do with almost every dollar of transaction in that $2 trillion. So the payers are responsible for all things related to that $2 trillion transaction, including fraud, waste, abuse. So we need intelligence from the data around these types of questions. About 30 to 40% of the $2 trillion is fraud, waste, and abuse. So if we can create reproducible evidence on how fraud is happening, or waste is happening, or abuse is happening, we can impact that 30% of $2 trillion. So $2 trillion compared to the NIH budget of 30, 40 billion was a huge opportunity staring at our face. And so I felt, wow, so if we're working with Odyssey community, there is this hidden opportunity. The hidden opportunity is because as an epidemiologist, the questions that we do, what we do as payers, is we sell a product, which is a health insurance, health plan, to a sponsor like Google, who's saying that we will pay for the insurance of our employees and their dependents. And once we sell that product to Google, we give them information about the cohort that we have covered, right? We have sold it for a year, and this is a cohort of individuals for 1 calendar year because we've sold the product for 1 year. So you have a cohort, and then we characterize the cohort, and we provide reports, business intelligence to say how many people, what is their demographic profile, what is their disease profile, what type of drugs are they on. And then we recommend plans to say drug tiers, network design. And so we cohort characterize, we say intervention strategy, and we want to do population level effect estimation to say, for this particular intervention had this population level effect. And then we also sell products and provide services, direct services to individual employees to say, disease management. If you have a diabetes and you are on a trajectory of getting sicker because you're non-compliant with your medicine or your diabetes is uncontrolled, because of your individual level probability, we will provide you some coaching and some educational materials, disease management, patient level prediction. So the Odyssey cohort characterization, population level effect estimation, and patient level prediction is core to what a payer does. So this was the hidden opportunity, the huge financial opportunity. So this is why I was excited about the Odyssey last year, and we have joined the journey.
That's amazing. So I'm from Google, and I'll actually speak from 2 points of view. So I spent a lot of my time on Google Cloud, where we built infrastructure essentially for many of the different enterprise customers that we have. And of course, we have quite a few healthcare enterprise customers. And one of the things that we noticed was people kept talking about in the healthcare space this OMOP thing. And as you guys probably know, in the healthcare space, there are a lot of acronyms. So we tried to ignore it for a while. But it kept coming up. And actually, Michael Ames, sitting on the side over there, really started to explain to us how he built a lot of his data warehouse pipelines on top of Google Cloud. And we really sort of started to explore with him and realized that there was this thing that he was using that was basically a version of a CDM plus a number of tools that he and others at Colorado and Compass were really trying to get working. So that's where we started to really start engaging with the community. We realized that there were a lot of folks, as clearly evident in this room, who were spending a lot of time trying to figure out how do you map healthcare data correctly, how do you define some of these schemas, and a lot of them want to make sure that this works on different types of cloud services. So we actually have a few engineers who are in the audience who are busy trying to get some of those tools working. So that's where we originally encountered OMOP and Odyssey. On the other side, as some of you might know in the press, we have various teams from DeepMind to Verily to Google Brain who's been working on healthcare analysis ourselves with different partners. As you guys can imagine, we sort of went into this process thinking that data is data. This is, we run it through the standard analysis systems that we have in ads and everything will magically turn out well. It turned out to not be the case pretty quickly. And we quickly noticed that we had to start mapping data fields to code sets. We had to define things like when patients were getting admitted, when they were really getting discharged. And a lot of the work that on the cloud side we witnessed with University of Colorado, we started to realize this applies a great deal also on the other side of the house, who's doing a lot of this analysis work. So we really started to sort of engage with the different parts of OMOP and started to take actually a lot of the work that you guys have created to try to extend it for various types of analysis that we are doing in-house. That includes the different types of population health analysis that I think this group is very, very used to. You guys have built amazing tools that we've in many ways leveraged to do some of our own analysis, as well as trying to figure out if you were to do things like machine learning or very, very large machine learning networks, where instead of predefining certain fields to try to do predictions, how do you do large-scale deep learning? This was something that came up on the face-to-face Odyssey OMOP Symposium 6 months ago or something like that. We've also been spending a lot of effort trying to figure out how do we incorporate different types of predictions and different types of machine learning predictions into things like that. And it's been super interesting. So that's how we are currently involved in Odyssey.
All right, wonderful. I'm way behind those experiences. I have actually a couple of good experiences right here. Actually, I'm new to this community, and actually this is my first appearance in Odyssey. And I hopefully that I will be continued in an interesting group and do a lot of research in pharmacoepidemiology, drug safety, pharmacovigilance, and so on and so forth. Why Odyssey? Very interesting question. As I said, I'm new to this community, and I realized that the Odyssey will helping a lot the regulators to sort out the research questions concerning the medication safety and pharmacovigilance. So if we are part of the Odyssey community, we can go ahead and forward our hypotheses to all of the collaborators, and we can come up with a lot of research methods assistance. And I just want to let you know that we recently established a research center. This research center belongs to Saudi Food and Drug Authority. And under the umbrella of this research center, we have recently established a pharmacoepidemiology database. This pharmacoepidemiology database should be representing the whole Saudi population. And at that time, we seek help of Odyssey organization, and we conducted a workshop where we invited all the stakeholders to come and attend that workshop, and we just emphasized the importance of establishing a pharmacoepidemiology database as a source of data for the and representative data for the Saudi population. From the mandate of the Saudi FDA, so by law, all of the hospitals must be connected to the pharmacoepi database. And as the Odyssey is a fairly well-known platform, so we choose Odyssey to help us running this database. And hopefully that we will have a very fruitful experience with running Odyssey in Saudi Arabia. Thank you.
Great. Well, we are very delighted to have such a diverse array of stakeholders in our community. And one question before I begin to allow other folks to come up that I'm curious about is, you have the opportunity, you're sitting in front of 400 people, maybe 389 if we had some attrition. You have the opportunity as stakeholders to bring your demands to the community. If there was one demand you could make to the community for the year going forward, what would it be? And you don't all have to answer. You weren't going to be voluntold to have to say it, but you have the opportunity, captive audience right here, and your unique perspectives to share on that particular topic.
I can go first. All right. So it would be nice for us to have an easy way to put Odyssey tools into production. And I'll try to explain that. When we buy a house or a property, we ask for a title search. We check to see if the title is clean, and in fact we'll trace back to its origin and see if there's any bad things going on with it. When a major organization wants to put an open source software into production, they want to do a title search, i.e., is the license clean? Saying it's Apache version 2 is good, but what's the history behind it from the source? So if you have the titles cleanly mapped out from the inception, 2009, 2008, all the way forward, it makes the legal departments of major corporations feel at ease. I think it's possible for the community to do it. I think now with GitHub, we have versioning, and we can show that it has evolved. But probably in the past, between 2009 to 2013, I'm sure it's documented, the version OMAP CDM version 1, version 2, no version 3, version 4, and also the applications, the history behind it. That would really help. That's my point.
Interesting. I think from our point of view, so Google is, in general, very supportive of open source projects, and we very much depend on open source projects. So we obviously are very interested in the success of OMOP and Odyssey. One of the things that we noticed is there is still and I think this was just mentioned, there's still a pretty big disparity between some of the production CDMs from folks like IBM, from Oracle, especially in the spaces that are not focused on pharmacosurveillance. So around things like payer, which a lot of time has already been spent on, around different other use cases, around public health, around et cetera. And when some of those use cases have big gaps and we are talking to folks that are interested in moving to Google, we tell them about OMOP and tell them about other things, and they end up having to, in many cases, build up completely foreign extra tables. That kind of defeats the point of OMOP very quickly. So it would be great to get the community, and I know the community is already doing this, to get some of the other stakeholders that frequently build these data warehouses involved to really get some of these data models to be on par, or at least to be usable by some of these other stakeholders as quickly as possible.
And to kind of add on to that, I think the other piece to me, seeing the CDM working group kind of evolve and having better processes in place, which has, I think, been great. The other piece of the CDM, or Odyssey in general, is the CDM is the foundation, but it's all the tools and the applications on top of it, and getting better coordination. And I know this will get there, but it's, we do a vote to add the visit details, for example. But what's the downstream implications to cohort methods? What's the downstream implications to Atlas? I think there are some conversations happening, but that kind of, if you're a company, you have a broad suite of, okay, this is my product set. Everyone's working on towards moving in that direction. But since this is an open source community, each group is moving at its own pace, and understanding how do those pieces link is a thing to look at.
Well, we invite the community to engage in this dialogue. This isn't just me and my 4 friends standing in front of my 400 greatest friends. If people would like to come up and ask questions, we invite you to come to the microphones. Don't rush at once and trample each other. We'll give folks just a minute.
Hey, I'm Siegfried Bold. I'm a independent consultant doing visualization work, totally committed to Odyssey. I'm also a PhD student at the Human-Computer Interaction Lab at University of Maryland. And I have a question for Gowtham and Jack. Is that, so with the licensing, so everything that I'm aware of is Apache 2, and the stuff that I write is Apache 2 also. But for some of the experimental user interface visualization things that I'm doing, I've moved out of Atlas, which is based on Knockout, which has been slow for me to develop in. And for better or worse, I chose React as my framework. But that comes with its own licensing issues. And I don't know what the name of that license is, but it has some patent implications. Do you know if those are going to be, what's that? I'm sorry? Oh, it is? So is that not an issue? Or is it, like, is that going to make it so that you wouldn't be able to use the code, or the inclusion of React is not going to be a problem?
So I don't know about React, to be honest. I think, but the general issue that you brought up is true in open source communities in general, when you are grabbing libraries from a bunch of different places who very frequently will have MIT licenses, Apache licenses, etc. I don't have a general good solution for you. I think every community has at some point sort of standardized on some licenses and basically had to slog through it. We actually had a different issue on our side, not so much around the frameworks. We had a different issue around the co-sets, where we have commercial customers who are interested in using it and suddenly walk into, depending on how you use the CDMs, a dozen co-sets that are semi-proprietary, proprietary, depending on where that person might be. It might be covered by NLM, might not be. And that part has been much trickier for us to deal with. But the framework part, I think we basically leave it up to the developers, at least at Google.
Prior to the 2016 Odyssey Symposium, I had no clue about what open source licenses were. And the learning curve was pretty steep. I think the concerns are around some of the restrictive licenses, like GPL2 and things like that. I don't know the answer to your question. If your question is, you have built an application on top of something that has a restricted license. So if React has a restrictive license, it's an open source with a restrictive license, and on top of it you have built an application that has a liberal license, I don't know the answer to that question. That's a legal challenge, but I'm sure somebody else has figured it out, and the answer should be easily available.
Okay, and I have one follow-up now because of the question about the code sets. So the Athena approach to that is just to let people take the code sets that they want, and if they need a license, they have to have a license for the ones that are licensed. So that's not working for you guys?
Ask a question in the community before you finish. How many people know how to find that license from Athena? Raise your hand. How easy was that process for everyone? No raised hands, or it's really bright up here. It's actually a really tough process, just to editorialize a little bit. It can be very tough to find the licensing that we reference. It can be very tough to do it. Perhaps an opportunity for our stakeholders would be to help give breadcrumbs on where their legal teams are pushing back and they need help getting the infrastructure documented to that degree of rigor, perhaps. I think I see John over there. It's pretty bright up here.
I apologize. I've used up my share questions for the day. But, Gowtham, you brought up this question this morning around something related to clinical decision support and how we get providers to move. I know, Jack, we've talked about this, and I spoke with several informatics type folks like Sean Granis and Les Leonard outside. And I'm really just sort of wondering your thoughts from all of you around what the interface, like the boundary of Odyssey and then sort of decision support and knowledge at the sort of point of care. Like, should Odyssey take that on as a responsibility that we think of, we want to create decision support tools, et cetera, or are we kind of generating evidence, maybe making APIs that make that evidence available, but we kind of stop there and turn it over to the rest of the community? So just want to get your thought about that kind of boundary.
I like John's loaded question. It's been a significant debate, I think, in multiple communities, let alone inside of Google. I'm sure everybody here is aware about FHIR and the many organizations who are setting up some version of a FHIR database to do CDS and actually in many cases do analysis. We've been, to be upfront, we've tried both, partly because there is a lot more information that you can put into FHIR bundles. You can basically not really map any data and basically run the whole thing into a giant FHIR bundle as long as you defined it in the profile. Whereas OMOP requires you to really define a lot more of the code sets and make sure you do the mapping properly. Of course, there are advantages, disadvantages on both sides. If you are dealing with some sort of population health management type analysis, you need some sort of code set management because otherwise you can't even figure out where the blood pressures are for a ton of the people in the database. On the other hand, when you're dealing with one specific patient, we found it much easier when we grab a lot of data to grab it out from FHIR bundles, especially given that many of the electronic health record vendors are now directly implementing FHIR. So we have not figured out a good answer to this. We have ended up supporting both communities and actually in many cases spinning up both instances where we will spin up both a FHIR instance as well as an OMOP instance. And depending on the use cases we have, we will sometimes look at one table versus the other. For clinical decision support specifically, I think we've increasingly tilted towards FHIR because that's where we're expecting a lot of the EHR vendors to directly be outputting that information. And if we need something that is in the order of, let's not even say seconds, but let's say within a minute of emission, we need to be able to pull that data. Right now, we are working on different types of ETL acceleration, but to do an OMOP mapping on a per minute, per X seconds type rapidity is not really possible at the moment. So we are really leaning on fire for that for now.
So, we don't have the privilege yet of comparing an OMOP instance with a FHIR instance, but I think that is something that needs to be explored, because that might answer your question, John, of where the Odyssey community stops and where another community takes on. But at the same time, there is also the ease. So after my question to Jenna, we had a conversation over coffee just about 2 hours ago, and she this is her expression. She said, "I really like the question, and tomorrow I'm going to sit at the bar and create a shiny app that does exactly what you said, where you build a model, take the model output, and score a new person. And all the app has to do is go in, put in the person ID, select the model, and you have the predicted probability for that person, plus it will give you some correlated information as to why that person had the score." And I'm like, oh, that's awesome. You just solved $1 million challenge. So the line is kind of murky, because there is that, okay, where do we draw the line based on principles and the ease? If this is truly that easy, and I have no idea, and she made it sound like it is, which is kudos to her. I mean, I don't know, but that's amazing. So I'm enamored by the possibility that the PLP package itself can solve it. So I think it's a combination of principles and ease. And most of the time it is who gets it done first.
No pressure, Jenna. Case, I think I see you over there.
Yeah, I wanted to chip in on the topic that Gowtham brought up. So in my mind, one of the success of OMOP and Odyssey is that it's so clearly scoped, right? When Patrick came up this morning, the first thing he did is defining what Odyssey is about. I don't think it's an accident. He's like a clever leader that understands, if you want to have a group, this is a purpose. So how, in my mind, that translates technically in a healthcare system is that on the one hand, you have a lot of sources, like the EMR, you might have a FHIR API on that. You might have specific registries and biobanks. You have genomics. Maybe you have a GA4GH API on that. You have wearable data collections. On the one hand, so all these disparate data sources. And on the other hand, I think where OMOP comes in is as Patrick explained, when you want to do observational research on medical data, then first of all, what this community unites is the OMOP model. And the fact that we have a well-versioned OMOP model as a foundation of this whole community, I think is a great value. And actually something where the Odyssey community is also quite ahead of some of the other communities where they're still struggling with this kind of amalgamation of tools, models, and apps. So, that's definitely, in my opinion, something that Odyssey should keep, is the model is the foundation. And that then also extends in two directions. On the one hand, it extends into the analytics. Because we share one model and one look on the vocabularies in there, we can start to build all kinds of analytics on it. And on the other hand, a challenge that we also share in this community is how do I actually get to my OMOP, right? And so what I'm interested in, Gowtham, I think you raised the question, to what extent do we need quality assurance or clarity on the licensing and open source in the context of operational hospital? I think that's an important topic, because in the end that's where most of our data is. So I'd like to hear more from you if you see any challenges or that, because we could talk from an architecture perspective about, for example, versioning and doing some QA on either the model or some of the tools, if you think that would be necessary to truly drive implementation, or Karthik, if you want to chip in on this.
So I'm going to try to pick a portion of your question, which is why the concern about license, or why the call for action at the community. This is a real life scenario that this question has come up. There are legal firms out there in various parts of the country whose job is to review community licenses and say, yes, this community license is appropriate for use or not. When a big name firm or a firm engages such a legal firm, the legal firm does reviews to say, is the license well documented? If there are gaps, then implementation is not possible. So in OMOP and in the Odyssey, because of the transition from OMOP experiment to the Odyssey community, there may be, the handoff is not very clear when you look back. So is that important? It depends upon the level of risk you want to take. So certain organizations have zero risk tolerance, some have higher level risk tolerance. So it's the policy of the local organization. What is the risk? I don't know, but that's what legal teams do. They try to protect. So I hope I answered that license portion of your question.
Yes, so basically there's two schools of thought when it comes to building the license provenance in open source communities. There's the one school that says, we have an open source license, in this case it's Apache 2, that governs, and that's enough. Because the Apache 2 has a lot of clauses already. For example, it explicitly excludes, that there is any patent problems. It gives you the perpetual right to use the code, etc. However, some communities, including Apache, for example, go further and say that it's best for an open source community to establish a formal entity that has the authorship and all the rights to the code. And the way you do that is by establishing such an entity and then have contributor license agreements with all the contributors. That might be a lot of work to go through for Odyssey. As far as I'm aware, that hasn't been in place. So in my understanding, Odyssey currently subscribes to the first school of thought. If we do need to eventually put the second in place, then it's something we can undertake, but I'd like to hear from maybe some of the Frank or others, Martijn, what your position on that is. But is it really needed to make this to use OMOP in hospital setting?
And perhaps this is a great
it.
dialogue we could kick into the forum and iterate over, and then it's documented in the legacy of our eternal memory of the forum.
But if I may add one comment to it, if it is required, we have a lot of stakeholders that are here, and I don't know how many organizations share the concern or have any concern at all, but if we can pool our resources and hire a firm or some legal firm to provide an opinion or do that task, that's a possibility. We have to explore it.
Absolutely. The action is ours, right, as a community to really follow up. The gentleman over here?
Yeah, I just have a question about the limits, I guess also on the same theme, the limits of what OMOP community should be taking on the burden of. The one issue I wanted to talk about was if there are certain standard vocabularies that don't have maps between each other that are very important, and it's sort of missing in the world. Is that something that the OMOP community should take on and actually try to create those maps and maintain those maps?
So you're saying, I couldn't hear clearly, but you were saying that there are codes that are not in the OMOP vocabulary.
They're not in the OMOP vocabulary, and there's also not standard maps in the world between certain vocabularies that would be very useful.
So, to me, I would say you go to the forums or you submit a proposal and it gets incorporated into the CDM working group, vocabulary working group. That's what we've done in the past, or, I know Erica constantly sends issues on GitHub as far as, things that she finds issues with the vocabulary itself, because there are mappings that she's expecting. And I know the vocabulary team is pretty responsive on that.
I think one of the things that would be very helpful is if there's a easier way for folks to share their, not necessarily even code sets, their different ETL processes. We've worked both internally and externally with a few folks who do various ETLs, and of course many folks use similar code sets to start with, but then there's a lot of various types of cleanups and minor tweaks that you do as you go along, and that ends up being actually quite a lot of work and actually changes the results quite substantially. In the EHR communities, there's Epic User Web, etc., and the different forums where people occasionally will share some of those ETL conversations, and you can see that different academic medical centers or different hospitals will have significantly different results based on some of those suggestions. I think in many ways the community has done an amazing job getting a lot of the public data sets already into the CDM, even exposing more of the how are people actually using it. If people were using it on a nightly basis, are they doing it differently than people who are batching it on a monthly basis? Are anyone trying incremental loads on an hourly, nightly basis? And if that is happening, how you're dealing with the ETL would be really, really interesting.
Sounds like a problem for Themis.
Yeah,
Not voluntolding you, but
I wanted to add one more. This is probably a quote from Christian Reich on the forum. He said, somebody asked this same question on the forum. They said, how do we add new vocabulary? Or how do you do this mapping? This mapping is missing. He said, make this wheel squeak, raise a stink,
Yep,
and
that
somebody
was
will
my
pick it up.
I-
If that doesn't happen, then you have to grease the wheel, because there are commercial vendors out there who will update it and make you on the top of the list.
that was actually my post on the forum. And he said, if you had a bag of money, that might encourage the momentum.
Sorry, I gave
So I don't know where my bag of money is, but I do believe Greg's team and some other folks they fill a very critical gap in the community. And I think you're right. The squeaky wheel gets the action, right? I think I see you again over there, Siegfried.
Yeah, sorry, I'm up here again. It's Siegfried. But I wanted to jump in on the Fire Odyssey question, because the way I've been thinking about it is we've got, upstream and downstream. We're all the way downstream. Like, we want the kind of lowest common denominator to some degree, so that we can take everything and then, we can do the analytics, but so there's that we've got it simplified so that there's a lot of data we can't accommodate, but we can accommodate the things that will answer most of the important clinical questions across many different kinds of data sources. So there's no way that that the sources that an EHR, a clinical decision support system could use as simple a model as Odyssey has. But the great thing about being all the way downstream, well, two things. One is, as a visualization programmer, like, you just couldn't even write the code to do really complex stuff unless you had a simple enough model that was widely used enough to justify the amount of work. And then the other thing is that the vocabulary system, I think, is incredibly brilliant, that the whole semantic network has been boiled down to a concept table, a concept relationship table, and then a few facets with relatively low cardinality, so that you can take very different terminologies and approach them in the same way. I think that's a model that should be used. I don't know if there are other industries that have as many controlled terminologies. I don't think there are. But they should have controlled terminologies, and then they should be harmonized in this sort of way, because it's incredibly powerful.
Yeah, I think one of the things that is very interesting to me is watching multiple of these communities develop, right, at this point. And I'd be very interested to actually hear your perspective on this, because we've seen some movements from the EHR vendors who are themselves building up Odyssey-like CDMs, right? So Kabuto is in many cases now federating, and you can imagine folks doing analysis directly on top of 20 instances of Kabuto, Cerner has healthy intent, where there's clearly a data model in the back end there as well. You can also imagine folks directly running queries in those environments. I actually don't know what is the prevalent EHR in Saudi Arabia, but the EHR vendors are themselves sort of realizing that a data model in general is useful across many hospitals. The COSET thing has been a tremendous advantage of this community, but if you were to look at Argonaut, for example, Argonaut has also standardized in many ways, because I think that in many ways we have same people in both communities. The same COSETs are now being adopted into Argonaut. So at some point, we do have to figure out the question of, in some of these raw tables, they are also mapped. So do you start building tools directly on top of some of these other models? Do you continue to do conversions onto Odyssey? Do you build an intermediate between Odyssey and Fire? And some of these questions I don't have good answers to. We're seeing many different folks, and I'd be very interested to hear what happens in Saudi Arabia, but many different folks trying all of these approaches, and it's very unclear which one folks will actually settle on.
Yeah, actually in Saudi Arabia, the Saudi healthcare system actually is a little bit fragmented. Actually, we have a insurance-based healthcare system, and we have a public-based healthcare system. So the public healthcare system is completely free for all the citizens of Saudi Arabia. So they do not have to pay anything for the healthcare or when they visit the primary healthcare. For the residents of Saudi Arabia or foreigners, they must have their health insurance. So for the EHR, actually, we have a couple of different systems. We have Cerners, we have different coding languages like SNOMED, Cerner, besides ICD-10 and ICD-9. So it's a wide array of coding language. So that's why we seek for help from Odyssey as a unique platform in order to map all of these EHR languages in order to come up with a common data model.
Anna, I think the floor is yours.
Yes, I am trying to understand some issues with Fire and APIs. In an operational hospital setting, how we can use Fire, I don't understand how we can do it, to integrate complex, disparate data, legacy data in multiple different formats, and from multiple different formats, and integrate them using Fire and APIs in a way that can be easily understood, because we are not dealing with the Google Map situation that the data is, or the Hubble map, the Hubble telescope grabbing pictures from Jupiter, a meteor hitting the surface of Jupiter, and we can see it 2 days later, and in great details. Here we are dealing with actually messy data, damaged goods, because the data is being collected but is not being intensively analyzed, and we don't know what we actually have that's good or is damaged and so on. Then I am trying to understand this piece.
Yeah, so I'll give you an ideal scenario case and what has actually happened, right? So in the ideal case, Fire will solve everything, theoretically, right? Because the ideal case is that you have a Fire profile. So basically you have a message where all the fields are properly filled out, and you will be able to use those fields to do your analysis. Of course, I think the Fire spec is written that way. It hand waves exactly what this community has been spending many years on, which is how do you actually get all the messy raw data into this perfect form? And Fire doesn't really talk about that. It just assumes that you will somehow, through contractors, through medical students, graduate students, faculty, magically get it to this perfect state, and then it defines the message surface to tell you how do you place this message in a standardized way so that you can then do analysis on it. I think how that actually happens is very unclear. We know well, hopefully with meaningful use free, that the EHR vendors will implement some subset of the FHIR Argonaut, hopefully the whole thing, but right now it seems like they're implementing at least a subset of it so that it solves some of the issue, because you basically shift the responsibility from communities like us who are hacking through tables to Epic and Cerner saying, we will give you the RX norm code or whatever code that you're looking for, loin code, directly without having to sort it through. But it's very clear that many of the tables that we use for analysis are not going to be part of that FHIR message, right? So anybody who is doing analytics, even if they're thinking about FHIR, already knows that there's going to be, fine, we'll get the patient name, we'll get admissions, we'll get some things, but there'll be lots of fields missing. And how do you bridge the gap, which is, I think, kind of what you're asking. And there are many different approaches, one of which is exactly, I think, what many of us are thinking about, maybe combining some of the data streams from OMOP and combining some of the data streams from FHIR and using them together to do this analysis. Maybe, and John, of course, has spent a lot of work on this, maybe you'll use FHIR to help populate the OMOP table because they have, the EHR vendors have done some of the cleanup. We don't have to do the cleanup, but for the other tables, we'll still have to grab it. I don't know what the right approach is. We would love to support sort of all these projects. We are trying to figure out, can we help with OMOP to FHIR? Can we help with FHIR to OMOP? Because honestly, we don't really know which way is the right way.
Yeah, so my opinion is, FHIR serves a very particular purpose, in my opinion, and I agree with Jack. It's to get, discrete clinical data, predominantly to communicate between, a data source or an application to another application. It's really good for app development, right? But not for large-scale analytics. You could use FHIR to populate your OMOP, but again, that's not large-scale analytics. That's kind of a version of an ETL. But to go back to John's question about dissemination, I do see FHIR as a potential of dissemination with OMOP. So you have your OMOP CDM, and you're running various models on it. Granted, it's not going to solve the problem of real time, because I don't think anyone in this room has real time ETLs or even a OMOP CDM that runs on an hourly basis. But if you have models in place, you don't need that. You need historical data that you've already pre-computed that's sitting, maybe in an extended table in OMOP, and you have FHIR sitting on top of that, so that when you have an admission, that gets fired, and it's just calling your FHIR API that's sitting on top of OMOP that's already done those calculations. The main thing there is OMOP is a place to do the data cleansing, bring in the disparate data sources. The EHR vendor does some of that, depending as you move towards a single system, like that's what Epic tries to do, right? Rather than using a bunch of ancillary systems, you try to go all Epic. But I think you still have data cleaning issues, and you either do it in-house within the EMR, but you would need a separate data source, and FHIR would just be an interface to pull information in and out.
Well, it will be a massive data cleaning, no? But also, when the data is transmitted through FHIR, we need to assure that it's received correctly, no? And I don't think that we have ways of actually
do the acknowledgement.
Yes, thank you.
I think it would be a great follow-up topic for maybe a community call or a follow-on discussion. I've heard many hallway conversations today. We're almost getting the Oscar music, so Mark, you get the last word. We're told you should ask a political question like R or Python, but we'll avoid those hot topics.
Given my emoji, I hate to be the one with the last word here. Might leave wrong smell in everyone's nose. I actually have a question for Nasser about processes in Saudi Arabia. This is not nearly as technical as the rest of the discussion has been, but I'd like to know kind of how evidence generation and dissemination works for drug safety in Saudi Arabia and how Odyssey can contribute to that.
Yeah, that's actually a very good question. The current situation in Saudi Arabia, specifically in pharmacovigilance system, Now we are trying to establish a new department, which is the epidemiology department. So that, you know, in way or another, we will connect this department to the research center, so we can conduct more drug safety research on the drug use within the borderline of Saudi Arabia. So the Odyssey will have a great contribution to this, because, you know, if we got all of these EHR connected to SFDA, so we need to map all incoming adverse events reports from different stakeholders. I mean, from hospitals or from the pharmaceutical industries through hospitals. So we just want to make sure that all of the incoming data are compatible with the Odyssey common language. So yeah, actually the Odyssey has a major contribution to this, and for sure there's a lot of challenges in drug safety within the Saudi Arabia. Actually, the genotype or there is a genetic variation for the Mediterranean peoples, specific in Saudi Arabia and Gulf region. So we just want to study the magnitude of this problem on appearance of new side effects in Saudi society or Saudi community that could not be discovered in randomized clinical trials or any observational studies in other parts of the world.
Great. Well, I think we have our mission. We have to help bring the Saudis into the fold and make this a bigger global network. World domination is pretty close, I think.
Yeah, it's a kind of, we benefit each other. So if we have our data connected to other parts of the world, so we can have more valid data. So our research will be more externally valid, and all the conclusions will be applicable either not only for the Saudi population, but maybe for the neighborhood countries.
Absolutely. Well, thank you all to our esteemed panelists. We really appreciate your perspectives, and I hear something big is coming.